sorry, the house is haunted. Yes, the ark. The guy said that Noah fed the animals because God sent manna from heaven, and that's how he fed them for the whole year. Of course, I wouldn't go into this kind of argument with somebody that believed that anything is possible with God, because therefore anything is possible, anything goes, therefore you can't say that it didn't happen. So therefore it did happen, therefore God's not a liar. So I guess I would go along the lines of that Adam, when he was talking to the snake, and the snake says that he would not die the same day, that God's a big fat liar, and a jerk, and everything else. Well, of course, when Adam eats the fruit and doesn't die, the snake is right, since God says the opposite thing, therefore God's a liar. It's pretty easy. And if the roles were reversed, everybody would say, if the snake said that he would die, and he didn't die, well, the snake is a liar. And if the snake came back and said, well, I didn't mean physical death, I meant spiritual death, he would get sad. Or the snake said, well, you'll die that day, meaning you'll become mortal and die later, or something. But nobody would make that excuse for the snake, and nobody would certainly let the snake get away with it. They'll say he's being tricky and all. But of course, if God says it, the good guy, supposedly, as good as he is, well, nobody will let him get away with it. So I'm not going to let God get away with it if the snake wouldn't get away with it, and he wouldn't. The other claim that apparently I make is that Jesus didn't exist. Like Brian Fleming in the video, I'm not sure if he says that Jesus didn't exist, but there's at least a reasonable chance that he didn't exist. It's not too far-fetched to say that a guy named Jesus and all this stuff never happened. Personally, I think that Jesus did exist. He did have a father, Mary and Joseph, and he had some followers. Maybe not 12, but he had some followers. And they thought that he did some miracles, and people heard about it, and they believed he did some miracles. They believed he was Messiah. And the authorities heard about it, and probably he did some things in the church or temples, and, chased out the money changers. That might have happened. Sermon on the Mount, I don't know if he actually gave that or not. We'll go ahead and give him the shadow of the doubt. And he probably was crucified for having his anti-Jewish beliefs or, whatever. That would be common too. So that's not too hard to believe. But what's amazing is that he might not have actually existed. For instance, the story of Romulus and Remus. I was talking to a guy at work about it, and I was asking him, did he think that Romulus actually existed? It sounded plausible to me. He had all these war stories and things. He founded Rome, and we get Rome as proof of Romulus, don't we? And the guy said, no, of course not. And looking into it further, it seems like a lot of historians don't believe in Romulus either. Now, I think it's weird that all these stories about him exist, but the guy never did. And of course, well, it's not just because he was raised by wolves, or a wolf, and he was born of a virgin. Mars was his father, and he came back to heaven and went back up in the whirlwind to join two other gods to be a trinity. Aside from that, it seems like the guy should have existed. I mean, people say, he lived here and he did all this stuff, but they can't even agree on that. And so if we look at Jesus and all the stuff that was written about him, the guy might not have even existed. If there was a guy and he was told the story about him in any of the Gospels, he might not have even recognized it. And it's even worse than that, because the stories that we have in the Bible are picked from other stories. If you go back and read the Gnostic Gospels and things that other people believed about Jesus when he was young, and, the stories seem very not true. They're very far-fetched. And so, of course, what we have is sort of toned-down versions of Jesus. And if there was more stories to him that, of course, we included everything, then we can say that this Jesus almost certainly didn't exist. I mean, even more than the one, because we had more stories. So if we take out stories, it becomes more likely. If we remove all the Gospels except for Mark, then it becomes even more likely that the guy resembling that story would exist than more. So yeah, we have some stories that have been cut out that didn't seem to be true to the people that did it. So we have more likely a story of Jesus. And I guess this brings me on to my next point, that the Bible's full of lies. The Bible's lies. Well, actually, most of it probably is lies. Almost all of the Old Testament Really, I'm not a historian, so I don't know how much of the stuff actually happened. They think that Moses actually didn't lead the people out of Egypt, all that. And I'm not sure about King David, if he was a real person. I don't know. But a lot of the things, Jonah and the ark, and especially since we're just talking about Jesus, all lies, I will say. But it's not really lies. I don't think the people intentionally told untruths, what they didn't think was true. They told what they thought was true. And at that time, what you thought was true. There was no need to have evidence, and especially if you're talking about Jesus. If you think the guy is the Messiah, you're not going to go question him on stuff, especially if you have other people that are going to cut your heads off and put you up on crosses and burn you at the stake. You're not going to question it too much. It would be dishonorable to your Savior. But I think it's more of a problem of deduction. For instance, my grandfather believes that everything that God makes lasts forever. And he believes that God made the sun, and therefore the sun will last forever. It will never go supernova. I couldn't argue him out of it because he's already reached that conclusion through logic and his false assumption to begin with. Well, the same thing happened about Jesus and almost everybody else. If they take their bad assumption, for instance, the Savior is going to be born in Bethlehem, and the people believe that Jesus was their Savior, or, the Messiah, therefore, what town was he born in? Jesus of Nazareth was born in Bethlehem, of course. And if you read, they get him there through some ways. But they don't have to go check it up. And even to suggest that they would have to go check it up would mean that they don't have enough faith and that they really don't believe he's the Messiah and all this kind of stuff. So they wouldn't do that anyway. But they came to this conclusion through logical means, so they're right. Whatever they think is right is right. Let's take, for instance, Noah, since I was reading up on that. If you look at the story of Noah and what the Jews thought, for instance, if you read some of their text, one of their historians says that there was a King Og, he was a giant. He was so big he had to fit on top of the ark and they had to feed him through a window. If you take some of the Christian historians, there was a guy that said that the ark represented Jesus, saving people. They had the bones of Adam and gold, frankincense, and myrrh that they loaded up. He probably wasn't making this up. He probably really thought that this is the way that it should have gone, so therefore it's the way it did. And, like God should answer prayers, and therefore he does answer prayers. So if God should heal me for believing and praying, therefore he did heal me. But anyway, so he was on, all the stuff was on the ark, and he said that the ark made the sign of the cross. Where did he get this from? Who knows? It sounds completely made up. I don't think that he thought that he was lying necessarily. Of course, some things in the Bible, we say, well, we compare it because it's not in the Bible, but some things in the Bible could be exactly the same way, especially like Jesus born in Bethlehem and being stabbed on the side, no bones broken. They knew what the prophecy was, so certainly they would say that Jesus matched the prophecy because the prophecy was made about him, and the prophecy, of course, is true, so therefore that's the way it had to have happened. It's completely reasonable. Except that, of course, they're false assumptions. Look at the Muslims in Noah's Ark. They think that, or one of their historians said that, because I don't think it was in the Quran, that he left the Ark, he was in Iraq. It was Iraq. He went to Saudi Arabia, went around the Kaaba, and then went back to Turkey. Where are they getting this stuff from? Probably because they just thought that's what the ark should do. Go around Adam's house and go back. Or make the sign of the cross. So I don't think that's really what the Bible is, a bunch of lies. I think it's people writing down what they think is true, and they think that they're right, and there's no reason they should say, well, I believe this is true, but I could be wrong. They're not going to say that. They'll say, this is the way the world works. This is what happened. The prophecy said that, and therefore it's true. Jesus did this as the prophecy says. That's why Jesus did it, is because the prophecy said. So I wouldn't say the Bible is really full of lies because that implies some kind of mischievous in there. I think that people just weren't I think they were just a bit too arrogant. Whatever they thought was right was right. So God's a liar, kind of. Jesus might not have existed. I wouldn't say that he didn't, but walking on water, that Jesus, no, never existed. And the Bible's full of lies. It's full of inaccurate historicity. I don't think almost any of that stuff actually happened. So yeah, there's my 3 justifications.